Welcome to the National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center's podcast, NCITE Insights. My name is Erin Grace, and I am the host. And with me today is Dr. Sam Hunter. Thank you for coming, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Erin.
So we are fresh off a terrible weekend event that has shocked our nation. And I wonder if you can help us, viewers and listeners. Sam is an IO psychologist who does a lot of terrorism research. Tell us about where you were when you heard the news and how you've been processing it.
I'm curious about your story as well, so I'll flip it to you in a second because we haven't had a chance to debrief. We're debriefing real time, obviously texting back and forth over the weekend, but I'm curious about your story. I was at home. My wife and I were just spending time together, got a news alert just like everyone else. And I had a bit of a sort of paradoxical reaction. One is, all of a sudden, I'm a researcher and somebody that works at a National Counterterrorism Center, and so I'm thinking about how our work applies to what's happening. What can I do to help or support in any way? Is that first reaction? But my wife, I think, was a little thrown by it and didn't want to talk about it a great deal. So I'm sort of sneaking news stories on my phone and talking to folks at work, and then trying to stay engaged with her on the time that we had a chance to spend together. And so everybody, I guess part of the takeaway lesson is everybody processes things a little bit differently. She started to process it more on Sunday as the sort of news stories are coming through. But for me, obviously immediately jumping in and kind of digging in and how the research applies to what happened. So it was an interesting paradox. And then I would also get a lot of texts and phone calls from friends and family that were just sort of wanting some sense making out of it, which I think is a natural reaction of, it's not that I had any more information than anyone else in the moment, but you did have a lot of folks that wanted to be calmed down a little bit and were concerned, which is a natural human reaction, and it's good to process it with those folks as well. What about you?
Same, was home, had test driven a couple way too overpriced cars, so I was kind of overwhelmed by the prospect of replacing our car, and I just hung up with my 81-year-old mom and told her I was busy and I had to go make dinner. Yeah. And then she texts back and says, turn on the news. Okay.
So your mom told you?
Yeah. So that's how I got the news. And then my 16-year-old son had to figure out how to get on CNN because I don't know how to work our television.
Sure.
And and so, it reminded me, Sam, it's so shocking, right? And you sit and you process it. And it reminded me so much of what happens here in Nebraska when the tornado sirens go off. Yeah. It is an instant jolting, run to the basement, figure it out. Yeah. And then after a while, there isn't new information. Right. And you realize, do I need this on the whole time?
Yeah.
Do my kids need to be absorbing the fear factor that's involved here? No. And so you go from the shock to kind of, okay, let's roll our sleeves up. We start texting each other, what's next? Yeah. Spend the weekend working. One thing that gives me comfort, obviously, is the work we do here at NCITE, is to have eyes on the problem. And, I was just looking up what NCITE projects we have that are related to this. Let's see. How have threats to public officials changed? That's been a big one that's been in the news all year. So if you've been paying attention to that in a way, the assassination attempt is not shocking. It's just the outcome of a buildup, sadly. On Thursday, we're going to have a webinar on the latest on understanding improvised explosive devices and how they've changed. We've got a project on linking conspiracy theories to the threat of political violence. Your friend Paul Gill in London. What is the threat of electoral violence in the U.S.? How does it impact workers involved in elections? That's really a good one. We've got a few more. How to better equip the threat assessment teams for outdoor events. So Tin Nguyen, who you recruited here to UNO. And then how can DHS's Enter Master Trainer program achieve its goals? But why you're here is to kind of ground us in your project, which is we call it DVE, but tell us what that stands for and what you've learned so far.
Yeah, domestic violent extremism, DVE. One, I guess, quick comment before I talk about that is just how powerful that list is. NCITE's always trying to be forward-leaning and thinking about not just where we've been, because the history is important, of course, but what the future threats look like. And you listed, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 different projects that can speak to what happened. And while there's no genuine comfort in that regard, I think it does speak to the minds at NCITE, and I know what gives me comfort is coming in and getting a chance to work with the folks here. That's what makes me feel better.
Yeah.
I know you were up at the office yesterday, but there was a part of me that almost just came up so that I could be here in the space, not knowing that you guys would be doing the press yesterday, just because I wanted to take that nervous energy and be around the environment that gives me comfort, which is my colleagues and the space. So that's interesting comment there. But in terms of the DVE project itself, so we've been going for about 9 months now. The focus of the project is thinking about the evolving nature of the domestic violent extremism landscape. Right now, terrorism research and the threats broadly are just incredibly nuanced and complex. So you've got the foreign threat, so folks like Austin and others that speak to that hasn't gone away. It is evolving and changing in different areas. So Africa, for example, really evolving and growing as a frightening and concerning area, and Austin's an expert there. But at the same time, you've got a rising domestic threat. We have known that, but we've also seen with the events over the weekend really the fruition of that threat. So the work that we're focusing on is understanding that evolving and changing nature of that landscape. What are the drivers of it? What are some of the ways that people are affiliated with organizations that we haven't thought about before, which is really the focus of the project, understanding the broader ecosystem of the threat landscape. So that's it in a nutshell. I can deep dive on any or all of those things.
So today, is Monday, July 15th. So we are 2 days out from this event, and information is slowly starting to come in. We know that the alleged shooter is a 20-year-old who lived about an hour or so away.
Yeah.
We don't know a ton about him, although there weren't the traditional markers that would put him on someone's radar, at least for now.
Yeah.
He, of course, has been killed by the Secret Service, according to news reports. And so, I'm trying to think of how, if you can, with what you know about the DVE landscape, how do we put a 20-year-old shooter who for now authorities are saying doesn't appear to be involved or affiliated with a group, ideology is as yet unknown.
Sure.
And, what happened with what we know about rising threats to public officials.
Yeah. I'll be a mildly boring academic and say we start to head into the land of speculation, which is always difficult, right, for academics. I mean, what academics will do is in 2 years write chapters and books about what just happened. And so in the moment, we have very limited information, and with the limited information, it's tough to make any huge calls. What we can do is talk about the research that we do know, hang point A here, talk about point B here, and then see if over time those things get connected. But recognize that when we're trying to build any of those bridges, we are in sort of speculation land, and less comfortable for academics to do that. But part of what we're trying to do is provide some sense making. So let's speculate a little bit. One quick thing is, I lived in Pennsylvania for 14 years. Yeah,
of course, your backyard.
Yeah, so I was at Penn State for 14 years before I came to UNO, and there's a part of me that empathizes and feels a little bit closer to that for that reason.
Absolutely.
Just outside of Pittsburgh, and our best friends live there, and so just seeing pictures of that place, reminds me of a place that we lived for a long time. And then, speaking about traditional markers, again, we've really shifted away from a profile perspective that there's one specific set of indicators or markers. Folks that commit acts of violence that are often ideologically driven come in a variety of shapes and forms, and so we take a equifinality perspective. There's multiple ways that folks get to the point where they commit acts of violence. There's not one single pathway. It'd be easier if there was. It'd be much easier to identify them early, but there's not, and if we get locked into that mode of thinking, we often miss things. And so part of it is we don't fully understand his connections quite yet, and then part of it is, like I said, people get to there for different reasons. With regard to his connection or affiliation, there's a lot of terms being used, such as lone wolf or lone actor. This is something that our project has pushed back on at least a little bit, which is to, certainly acknowledge that from a tactical and operational standpoint, he was alone. There wasn't anybody else with him, as far as we know. But he more than likely, and this is the speculative part, but one I feel at least somewhat comfortable making an educated guess on, likely had some affiliations and connections to probably online environments, maybe others as well, but my guess is some online connections. And so time will tell what those affiliations look like. And so at least with regard to other areas of research, and again, I don't want to speculate too much on him, but we can say with other what would historically be considered lone actors, they typically have some affiliations with online organizations or online ecosystems. And so to characterize them as being someone who's really operating entirely alone, I think is a little nuance is lost. And there's some room to better understand that this person may not have engaged in acts of violence had it not been for this ecosystem that they were a part of. Now, there's a chance that they do it entirely independently. I'm not ruling that out, again, in this situation. But I think as researchers, we're better understanding that those affiliation comes in a variety of different shapes and forms. And if we get better about understanding those affiliations and shapes and forms, we have a much clearer picture about what it means to belong and affiliate in those organizations.
I'm so grateful, that you declined to speculate. I tried to teach.
It's disappointing.
Told you don't speculate, and then here I am saying, Sam, speculate.
We all want to do that because it gives us comfort. I mean, we're just all looking for sense making, right? This is what my family does. This is the conversations I have with you and the other folks in the office, as well as my wife. I mean, we don't want to think that the world is random because that's really scary. And so if we understand the reason, there's comfort in that because at least you know where a threat may be coming from. And so we naturally speculate just to help ourselves sleep at night. So I get the appeal of it, but as a scientist, you have to stand back and be a good scientist, even though in my head I'm speculating. So.
Well, thanks. But I'm glad you mentioned that, he may appear to be alone if he's alone on the roof, but really he's not alone. He may be, and we don't know yet, part of a larger community that exists online, which of course all of us are now parts of because we live online. And I'm grateful that you mentioned that because a story that I flagged last night that was in the news was about Blue Anon. We're so used to, or they're thinking that the conspiracy theories come from the right side of the political spectrum. Blue Anon is this idea that conspiracy theories right after this were being spun up by the left about how this could have happened. And so, in light of all this, I think of former President Trump calling for unity and current President Biden saying, we got to cool things down. And so the psychologist part of your training, tell us how you do that. I mean, it sounds simple, right? Just turn the burner down on the stove. Fine, works out.
It's hard.
What can the normal person do in their workplace or in their life or in the groups they belong to online or in person to not be part of the problem?
Yeah, well, getting offline and actually talking to people in person is probably the most natural response. It's much harder when you have someone in front of you that may differ ideologically to have hatred for them, but it's much easier to do in an anonymous or dehumanized environment. So close our laptops and go talk to your neighbor is a trite and overly simplified response, but one that carries honestly a lot of weight. It's good to see our leaders standing up and saying we need to be unified, we don't need to be separated. I think as a psychologist, understanding that we are naturally drawn towards creating in-groups and out-groups, we will often find our own tribes and be very insular and protect those tribes. And so at a time of threat, it's natural for us to sort of surround ourselves with folks that are feeling the same way that we are and even further get divided. So in order for that to be avoided, I think we have to very effortfully and think very carefully about not falling into those camps. So reaching out to folks that are on the different end of the ideological spectrum, the neighbors, the friends, the coworkers, the family members that may see things differently, ask them how they're doing. Just simply that question of, how are you right now? Everyone is scared right now. We're all bonded in that sort of trauma. And so just, how are you feeling about things? Be empathetic and listen. And a lot of those barriers start to break down and the temperature starts to come down when we don't view, obviously, other groups as the threat, because the inverse is where we get into danger. And I think we have an opportunity to come together over something like this rather than being divided. It's hard. I think it doesn't happen unless we think about it and do it with effort. But if we do that, the science certainly says that a lot of our problems get solved by talking to someone, particularly one-on-one when there's no cameras rolling or there's nobody taking notes and trying to embarrass you in any way, but just having those candid conversations goes a long way.
That would be a good note to end on, but clear-eyed, what are you thinking of for this week? Like, how has this event maybe shaped how you're going to approach your research or how you talk to students? Or
It's interesting you ask, because I got in early today and I had a couple of my students also in early, and you could just sort of see the looks on their faces of, hey, what's your take on things? Because they are looking for some of that comfort and sense making as well.
Sure.
The folks that we're closest with, they're reaching out in that regard. I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but there's a fire under all of us, but I can certainly speak for me, which is the work that we're doing is relevant. A lot of the specific studies and papers that we've written all speak to the events in their own unique way. Some of those are much closer than others. A few are in process and have told me that we're on the right track and we really need to think more about some of these topics. And so it's motivating. It's a push forward because it's made me realize just how important all this work is. We're getting requests from folks in our government for some guidance and structure on things, and so it's just pushing us to get the important work done. And
good.
so I have a fire lit under me because I think what we do is very relevant and speaks to the unfortunate events that have occurred.
That's a great spot to kind of wrap up. For our audience, for this week, we've got a couple of events you should pay attention to. One is Thursday. Tune in to a public webinar on changes in how we counter IEDs, improvised explosive devices. That features Austin, as you mentioned before, Dr. Austin Doctor. He's a political scientist here at UNO. The week after that, we'll have Melissa Zisler from...
This is great.
From she's the Enter Chief, National Threat Evaluation and Reporting Office for DHS, and we'll have kind of the guy who runs the Behavior Threat Assessment Management team in Phoenix for Phoenix Police Department on. So,
cool.
So if we go to our website, unomaha.edu/NCITE.
That's good.
Shameless plug.
Good job.
Hidden events. That is something I think sometimes just having, it's like idle hands. Having something to do helps us feel part of a solution. And tuning into that can just be something people can do from home. So thank you, audience, for tuning in. Thank you, Sam, for
Always
coming.
A pleasure.
And Ben Badafarano, you can't see him, but he's the one pulling all the bells and whistles. So with that, we'll sign off.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.